My welcome to you all. My name is Janet Scorer. I'm the New South Wales Children's Guardian, and I'm a member of the New South Wales chapter of the National Regulators Community of Practice and one of the members of ANZSOG's Alumni Council. It's my great privilege to be facilitating today with three such distinguished senior leaders, Aboriginal leaders and colleagues. And so I'll give you a brief introduction to each of them and then a bit about why we're here today before I throw over to each of them. Brendan Thomas is a proud Wiradjuri man. He's been the CEO of Legal Aid in New South Wales since May 2017, coming into that role from a very distinguished senior career in criminal and civil justice administration and research. He's led many major reforms in New South Wales across domestic violence, services to victims of crime and to Aboriginal communities, including Aboriginal sentencing courts. Simone Jackson is a proud Kamilaroi woman from southwest Queensland and a very accomplished senior public leader with over 20 years experience in justice and human services in Queensland and in the Northern Territory. She's currently the Executive Director, Culture and Economic Participation in the Queensland Department of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Partnerships. And Philip Brooks is a descendant of the Wiradjuri, Curry and Dukabrook peoples and is the Deputy Director General, almost gave you a promotion there, Philip, of the Queensland Department of Youth Justice. Philip has had an outstanding career in the child, youth and family support portfolio in Queensland and is somehow finding the time to undertake ANZSOG's Executive Masters of Public Administration. Well done, Philip. Before I throw to these three thoroughly impressive people, I wanted to give us their thoughts on what culturally responsive regulation would look like. I wanted to just give you a few thoughts from my perspective as the New South Wales Children's Guardian. This was a topic that in our committee, New South Wales Committee, we began discussing because in our role in New South Wales as the Children's Guardian, our job is to regulate the out-of-home care sector, and as we know, Aboriginal children are overrepresented in out-of-home care, and there are many Aboriginal community-controlled organisations within our sector in New South Wales. But it strikes me as the regulator that we've never contemplated whether our regulatory framework, how we approach regulation, or even our practice, we've never really contemplated that from a first principle of what is it the right thing to do for Aboriginal children and organisations. Much of our regulatory practice internationally is derived from non-Aboriginal thinking, and so it strikes me that it's a good time for us to think about, do we have the right architecture in place? Do we have the right approach to regulation that suits not only an Aboriginal community-controlled sector, but is it best for our kids? And so I wanted to start a conversation about where this topic might take us as we think about regulatory practice. I'm going to let our three speakers have an opportunity to provide their perspectives before we open up to you. All three will talk to you about how they've experienced regulating community-controlled organisations, whether that's through funding agreements or accreditation or in other forms of accountability, and how they think organisations experience government as regulators. Then we'll start the conversation about how we build bridges to that so that we have thriving and high quality service providers in our Aboriginal communities that they so rightly deserve. So we're going to go through, and I'll first ask Brendan to speak to us briefly about his thoughts on this.
Thanks, Janet. Thanks for that introduction. And I'd like to recognise the Gadigal people on whose land I'm sitting on this morning. Look, I've got three messages for people regulating Aboriginal community organisations, and they're pretty simple and straightforward, I think. The first one is focus on the client. I mean, regulation exists for a purpose, and that purpose is usually about making services meet certain service standards or protecting the rights of individuals. And it's really important that those services in Aboriginal communities are doing a fundamentally good job. And I think too often in regulation, we miss the point of the regulation, which is the focus on the client and the people who are the subjects of those services. And too often in regulation of Aboriginal organisations, we see regulators that are scared to take action or reluctant to take activity in Aboriginal service areas and don't intervene in problems until they get too bad, and they end up closing organisations down and depriving people of services. Aboriginal communities need these services because of the disadvantage that they face and because they have strong service needs. So don't let your own inaction or indifference entrench somebody else's disadvantage by the way that you're regulating those services. The second point I'll make, having said that, is regulation really should be a tool of enablement. Your job as a regulator really is to make sure that those organisations are doing a good job. It's in everybody's interests that the system that you're regulating is working well and performing as well as it possibly can and delivering the best services for the clients that it's set up to regulate. There's nothing wrong with a regulator establishing a strong and close relationship with the organisations that it's regulating and the organisations that represent. There's nothing wrong with establishing strong connections with the organisations that you're regulating and getting to know them and getting to understand them and getting to understand the way they do business and the way they operate and interact. The worst kind of regulation is a regulator that sits on the sidelines and throws stones and points fingers. A good and proactive system of regulation for Aboriginal organisations and Aboriginal communities is one that enables organisations and helps people to be able to do a good job and to be able to meet the needs that those organisations have been established to meet. You have to understand, often you might be regulating organisations run by a chairperson who's never attended high school. I mean, people who are working in Aboriginal community organisations don't do it usually for any other reason. They want to provide a benefit to the community that they're representing. And it's in everybody's interest, as I mentioned earlier, that those organisations are healthy and well and that they're functioning. And one of the ways that regulators can do that is by establishing strong working relationships, proactive relationships with the organisations that they're regulating and working in partnership with them to make sure that they're doing a good job and that there's a very proactive focus on getting on top of problems and helping people solve those problems rather than throwing stones and taking punitive action when things get out of hand. The final point I'd make is it's really incumbent on regulators to understand what they're regulating. Don't assume Aboriginal communities operate the same way non-Aboriginal communities do, or that Aboriginal organisations function in the same way that non-Aboriginal organisations function. They're different. People interact differently. Don't let your regulation assimilate people. It's pretty easy to go about assimilating Aboriginal organisations by establishing a whole bunch of regulations that assume they're white people and then rigorously enforcing those. They're not, they're different. People have different ways of operating and different ways of going about doing their business, and it's really important for regulators to understand what those differences are, and then to take the next step by shifting your regulatory mechanism to make sure that you're properly understanding and embracing Aboriginal ways of working and Aboriginal ways of doing business. And it's not enough to just think of Aboriginal people or Aboriginal communities as some kind of diversity target. You know, working with our communities isn't just about some kind of 2% ticker box. If you're working in the area, for instance, of child protection, and 40% of the clients of the organisations that you're regulating are Aboriginal, 40% of your organisation's effort needs to be Aboriginal. That means 40% of your staff should be black, 40% of your management should be black. Your operational proceedings should be Aboriginalised as much as possible. You should really think about how you as a regulator start to Aboriginalise your practice, how you start to Aboriginalise your organisation, and how you take the engagement of Aboriginal clients and Aboriginal organisations seriously. Don't just think you can appoint a poor Aboriginal community liaison officer and expect that person to take all responsibility for dealing with Aboriginal communities and Aboriginal clients, or that person's going to be able to somehow solve the challenges that you as a regulator will have in dealing with Aboriginal organisations and Aboriginal communities. Those of us that work in the public sector often deal with significant volumes of Aboriginal clients and are making decisions that affect profoundly Aboriginal families and the well-being of Aboriginal people in incredibly detailed ways. I often say we're now in situations that the old protection boards were in previous days. It's the same level of contact with our communities. And we should be able to use that contact to help and enable people and to move people to a positive situation. But to do that, organisations really need to think about how they Aboriginalise their business. As I say, it's not just about a simple diversity target. It's not just about ticking a box. It's not just about community consultation and community meetings. It's about understanding the organisations that you're regulating, understanding the services they're providing to their clients, how they operate and how they do that, and making sure that you're doing that in a way that's enabling them to provide the best service they can to those Aboriginal clients, but that you're really thinking about how you redesign your organisation, how you restaff your organisation, how you skill your management, and how you design your operations so that what you're doing is enabling those organisations to do that and protecting the interests of those Aboriginal clients to make sure whatever the service system they're in, whatever the services are that they're accessing, that you're trying to guarantee that the quality of the service that they're getting, the quality of the interaction that they're getting with those organisations is as good as it possibly can be. And that's your job as a regulator. It's not just to tick boxes or throw stones or to find fault. It's really to make sure that that service system is operating well and operating in a healthy way. Thank you for taking the time to listen to that. And I might hand over to my colleague, Simone Jackson.
I hope I offer something slightly different, noting that I agree wholeheartedly with what you've said. For me, when I looked at this topic, I looked up the term regulatory in the dictionary, and it was striking to me that some of the words used to describe that are controlling, governing, authoritarian, rigid. That automatically jars, I think, with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's natural way of governing or regulating themselves within our own family, community and broader environments. When we look at our own systems of governance, you know, it's more collaborative. We would consider, you know, a council of elders or local leadership or multiple decision makers taking on board lots of thinking and interest. And it's more of a consultative, collaborative approach to regulation, but it's still regulating. The same construct with regards to the purpose, however, is okay, but I think we need to open our minds to a broader methodology that takes in primarily what Brendan had said there at the end, which is an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander safe approach to this work, and it is vastly different. But different doesn't mean we should be scared of this. Different doesn't mean that it's not going to deliver the same outcomes, and different doesn't mean that it's not good. When I think of my time looking after children in a child protection system, it's the same argument. If the client base is 50, 60, 70, 80, 90%, then the people determining those decisions or structures need to represent that client base. The best services, as we know, are actually delivered by the communities that we all live in and are reflective of those communities. We need Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations to thrive. And to do that, we need to be open to understanding that a Aboriginal and Torres Strait organisation deemed very remote is going to have different considerations than one in the urban area, such as a Brisbane City or a Sydney. And again, that's not a bad thing. That's about us coming to the table and recognising what those nuances are and how we might support that contribution. I have first-hand experience. I actually took a couple of years out of government and became the CEO of an Aboriginal justice group because I wanted to have that experience and I wanted to interact with government on the other side of the wall and see what that was like. And that first-hand experience is that there's a perception here, and again, it's what Brendan said, that every time an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander organisation falls over, it's because they've done something inappropriate or there's been a misappropriation of funds, etc. But it's been my first-hand experience that in actual fact there is very limited assistance out there for First Nations organisations to really get their head around what is in essence good governance and how good governance will help an organisation to not find themselves in a predicament where closing the organisation down or having that negativity is the only outcome. And I think Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we have naturally a very strong sense of governance, and sometimes it's just about bringing in some expertise to help them. And we've seen some good models over the country more broadly about how this works. Some of those are hub and spoke models where you might the organisation will be in control of all the operational requirements, and the hub component might be that we bring in some expertise to build on those governance skills and abilities, including accounting, funding, etc. I think we can absolutely balance the two. I don't think it's a one or another approach. And I think we need to think about, what do we really want to achieve here? Is it compliance over outcomes, or do we want to enhance the service delivery that we know is best suited to this client group? That is, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people will attract Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander clients, and will indeed know firsthand what those community organisations need to deliver in that location to improve whatever it is we're seeking to improve. They know their clients. I think we need to be really open, and in Queensland we talk about co-design. We need to be open that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people deserve a seat at the table of accountability. So I think the old construct was that the government, smacked hands. You haven't done this right, you haven't met this, we're going to take this off you, and then there's a negative report. In actual fact, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people sitting at the table with government to determine not only the service type and description, but the compliance and accountability measures that we're equally responsible for in that space, I think is a really worthwhile proposition going forward. There's a saying in child protection that culture doesn't negate safety for children, and I think it's the same for regulatory practices. The compliance shouldn't negate enhanced outcomes or benefits. So that's my strong thought on the topic, and I want to thank everyone, and I'm now going to hand over to my Queensland colleague, Philip Brooks.
Is that we got self in the middle. So this is how I grew up. My mum was an academic. I was lucky to have someone that put a framework around what it actually is to be Aboriginal. And people will say, what are the difference? Well, you'll see there, this Aboriginal self inside. Self is the physical, social, emotional, spiritual, well-being, personality, career, sexuality, self-esteem, your lived experience, your education. Culture, you'll see there also. That's about your traditional law, your practices, beliefs, values, protocols, your kinship, your lands, social norms, structure in society, the history and survival, knowledge and wisdom that you currently have passed on to generations. Family, you'll see there also. Kinship, your belonging, a place, a role, a function, a mother, a father. We lost my mother in 2013, and although Western society would suggest I'm the most successful person in my family, I didn't speak at my mother's funeral. It wasn't my place. Aboriginal community, you'll see also there, community members, elders, the dispossession that's occurred in that land and the oppression that's happened in that particular place. What does it actually mean through the generations? What's Western culture done to that place? So Simone and I have had the privilege to work across quite significant areas, and Simone even further in the Northern Territory, of course. Western society then, coupled now, that 200 years of that Western society, what the economy, institutionalised racism, police, courts, jails, alcohol, drugs. So there has been some conversations about what it is to be Aboriginal, or what's the difference. So I just wanted to have a bit of time for people to actually understand that history as well. For what it means around culturally responsive practice, at the end of the line for myself, it's to ensure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have the same privileges and or outcomes and or safeguards as our non-Indigenous counterparts, that they're able to achieve everything sought out and obtain the same service that is received by non-Indigenous persons when it comes to outcomes. The last one I want to leave you with, and I will hand back to Janet very shortly, is in relation to non-Indigenous allies. And right now, there's nobody more important than non-Indigenous persons within this conversation. And what I mean by that, in shorts, in short is, because a lot of people either agree or disagree with me, but if you put a domestic family violence lens in Australia right now, we're getting traction. It's been illegal since 1987 regarding domestic and family violence. But right now we're getting movement and social change. Why is that? Because we have men challenging men around their attitude towards women. In the same front, non-Indigenous allies have a real powerful place at this table, because Indigenous persons aren't at the barbecues. They aren't at sporting fields. A lot of them aren't at the board tables. So we're needing people like yourselves, the non-Indigenous allies, to jump on board and help us with some momentum regarding change. I hope everyone has been busily sending their messages, and I know they have on Slido, because I'm about to hand back now to our amazing facilitator to open up the conversation. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you. I didn't even have to pay for that compliment. That's fantastic. Thank you all. There is so much there for us to contemplate in the next half hour. Brendan, the first is for you, and I think there are a number of questions around this. Could you talk a little bit more about what you mean by Aboriginalising practice, and perhaps even from the perspective of a leader? What role does a leader have in changing the culture or the practice within any organisation, but particularly when regulatory cultures can be, as Simone referred to, a bit more controlling, if I can put it that way? What would be your suggestion?
Look, I think there's a few things that leaders in the regulatory field can do. One is to really get a proper understanding of the clients of the service system that they're regulating. There's nothing wrong with regularly going out and speaking to the clients of the organisations that you're engaged with. I mean, if use the example I gave before in the out-of-home care environment, if you're regulating out-of-home care and you're not regularly talking to the families that are involved in that system, then I think you're not doing your job effectively. I mean, the first point is for a leader to do that, and I think for a leader to be seen doing that, not just to mandate it, but to actually get out and do it. Second is to try and understand the regulatory environment that you're imposing on those organisations, and think about what the outcomes are you're trying to achieve through that environment, and design your regulatory system to best affect those outcomes, as opposed to wrap red tape around people or tick boxes. What is it that regulatory system is trying to achieve for Aboriginal communities, and how do you best go about providing an environment where those organisations are enabled to achieve those outcomes? And it depends on what that service system is as to how you might go about designing that. But you won't be able to do that sitting behind your desk. You need to get out, talk to clients of that service system, and talk to the people that are running the services in that system. I mean, you're generally in the public service not regulating for-profit systems. I mean, people aren't out there making profit. They're in these organisations because they want to make a difference. And I think if you start from the premise of we all want to make a better difference for Aboriginal clients here, and we can do that together, that's with not absolving yourself of your regulatory responsibilities and your statutory responsibilities, but thinking about how you do that in real cooperation and conjunction with Aboriginal people and Aboriginal organisations. And there's an opportunity then for leaders to open their door to help co-design those systems with the organisations that they're working with and the communities that they're working with. There's nothing wrong with doing that. As a regulator, you've got the final say into what those systems are and how you're going to go about doing it. But you really should be bringing people in to help you design that, depending on what your particular system is. The final point I'd make is that one I made earlier about how you start to Aboriginalise your organisation. Most regulators, I'd suggest, in the public environment are regulating service systems that have high Aboriginal involvement in whatever the service system is. And your organisation really should start to reflect that, and you need to take that seriously and properly. Don't just employ a couple of kind of school graduates on your front counter and think you're doing something nice for the Aboriginal population. If a significant proportion of the clients of the service system you're dealing with are Aboriginal, then you should have a significantly Aboriginal organisation. And that's from the management level all the way down. And thinking about how you engage other people in your decision making. There's nothing wrong with having strong advisory groups, strong engagement groups, so you're regularly getting feedback from the people involved in the system that you're regulating, and again the clients that are experiencing that system. I mean, the best feedback you can get about how a system is performing is from the people that are using it directly. And I couldn't more strongly encourage regulators to get out of their office and go and speak to people who are experiencing the systems that they're dealing with.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good point. Simone, did you want to add anything on to those comments around that topic, and particularly around leadership?
Well, I concur and agree. I think in 2020, I'm not even going to be that generous. I'm going to demand that the makeup of any of these decision-making bodies, whether that be government or a board or whatever it is reflective, as I said before, on the client group and the percentages. So, you know, I felt for many years that we begged for the one sliver, you know, the one seat at the table to provide some input when the client base we were dealing with was sitting at the 70% mark. And I don't think it's okay anymore to not acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are everywhere. We're not just the community member, we are the senior public servant, we are the lawyer, the police officer, the Director General, Deputy Director General, medical practitioners, professors at university. So in my mind, the makeup of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people at the table needs to reflect all of those skills, abilities, because that's the richness of the input that we need, and it's also reflective of the journey that we've been on. And I just don't think, like I said in the beginning, I think these things can coexist. But they can coexist in a way that is reflective of a methodology that pays homage to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's natural governance practices. And I do want to leave people with, I am in no way saying, because I'm known for being quite hard in this space, I am in no way saying that there's a free pass for not meeting, you know, the financial and other compliance requirements. I think I don't want to be part of an organisation or part of a roadmap anymore where there is a deficit there or where there is criticism about that, because I acutely believe we have got the skills and abilities to meet those requirements, as long as we're at the table determining what those accountabilities are and what that makeup is. So I agree wholeheartedly with my comrade, and I just think it's the time now to be really sharp and really firm about our expectations of what this looks and feels like going forward.
Thank you, Philip. I think it's a big topic, particularly sort of the issue of culture and leadership being representative. Is there anything you wanted to add into that?
Yeah, probably just by exception, because I completely agree with Brendan and Simone. I think the biggest thing, Cod has written a lot of information and a lot of people will be aware of him regarding leadership and management. I think the biggest thing around that, and there's probably a diversity of parties on the webinar today, but the big part around that is understanding management is what their skill is getting the complex and making it simple for people to have bite-sized activities to be able to do and deliver. The part where the leadership is that you talked about and others have talked about is having the ability to get others ready for change. And I think that's what we're talking about here today. So if you're in a position of leadership, regardless of where you are, what is your readiness for change and how you're getting the system in readiness for change? Because obviously there's a whole range of things that sit behind the service system of regulation, and that may be bigger than all of us, but we all are part of the system itself. So step by step.
Thank you. One of the questions here is for me about what we've done in my organisation to bring ourselves alongside the organisations we regulate in a respectful way, and how really how far along that pathway are we? And I'd say we're really at the first step in my view, and a lot of that, as a leader is about the expectation you set within the organisation about people's own cultural awareness, and that is a big journey that we're on as an organisation, but one I'm deeply committed to, because so many in any organisation would be people who were at school when you were taught that Australia was founded when Captain Cook put his boot on the sand, and to unpack all of that history and to acknowledge a different history and to sit with the discomfort of that is a good and right journey for us to go on. But it also enables us to understand why having a really healthy, in our environment, having a really healthy Aboriginal community controlled sector is important. And as Brendan said, to understand the context for an organisation that you often have a board or a group of people running an organisation who are doing it because they want a different experience for their children. They'd rather do the work with the family early on so that kids weren't in care. But how do we approach that relationship and engagement differently so that we respect that they're doing something that's different but need a different set of skills and work with us? And so we've done some work on that about how do we regulate differently, but we're on a new path to think about how do we do it entirely differently. We're starting that conversation in New South Wales with our Aboriginal sector and designing our work from their perspective rather than the other way around for the first time. So hopefully in the years to come we'll see something quite different. I wanted to also ask about the question we've got here is about where do you find, what's the role that you mentioned, one of you mentioned about non-Aboriginal allies. What role do you think that other people in leadership or within organisations can play to really shape something different and have a different collaborative approach? Where have you seen that work well, for example? Philip, I might start with you. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, where I've seen it work well is when Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander persons are provided the opportunity to be part of the conversation and be part of the solution. And that's because parties, non-Indigenous or otherwise, accept that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are best placed to make decisions for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people within Australia. They accept that there is much that can be learnt, and that's some of the skills or qualities that you're looking for is people around willingness to learn, humility, respect, open-mindedness. When we have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as part of the solution, we've done that and seen that within Queensland or Victoria more specifically as well for the others around devolved authority. Now it is the first steps and it's big steps. But there is first steps around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people being equal. And when I say equal at the table, I also mean equal when it comes to accountability. Because one thing I am for sure, and happy to be corrected by my panel guests, but Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, just because we're equal at the table doesn't mean we want to shirk our responsibility. And one of the things that Dr. Chris Sara talks about, and Simone might want to expand on, but ultimately that the high expectations. We should expect high expectations of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander persons across Australia, and we don't want any different. We want those high expectations, and we were really keen to step up to the table and be part of that. So the non-Indigenous allies part, where it's worked well specifically, and I used the example before, was around domestic and family violence as a bit of a parallel for men challenging men. Where I've seen it work well is when we have the non-Indigenous allies the first to speak up. Non-Indigenous allies stopping policy platforms or having a voice around policy platforms. I've been in a room before, regardless of my level, and there has been times where I've had to say nothing. And there's been academics, senior public servants or other allies in the room speaking up around change or readiness for change. That's where I've seen it work well.
Thank you. Simone, did you want to add anything onto that?
Well, it's funny. I read an internal email, and I'll leave the agency out because it'd be a bit naughty, but I got this morning off a colleague. Sorry. And in short, it's a commissioner stating to all staff that he will not accept what he has heard or witnessed as both subtle and right in your face racism. So the Aboriginal staff in this particular area being in some instances bullied or dismissed or not able to contribute in the same way as their non-Indigenous colleagues. He's called the behaviour out. It's a page and a half. He's hauled them all back to the code of conduct and the values he expects of that organisation. And I have to tell you, there's only two other people I've seen in my whole 26-year career that have done that as non-Indigenous people. And I did feel this morning, wow, that's really going to set the tone and the expectation for those staff. And he really went there as in, not only won't I put up with it, you won't work here if you don't meet these standards. And I think that conversation that someone had before about sitting in that uncomfortability, that for me is the most exciting thing that's going on at the moment. It is, and I don't want to be wrong because I'm getting a bit old, and you know, when I was in my 20s, I was so enthusiastic that, you know, I was sure I was going to change the world. And there have been periods, and I think everyone online will know what I'm talking about, where 15 years post that enthusiasm, the numbers are higher, or the outcomes are worse, or we haven't achieved what we wanted. So I'm embracing what appears to be a genuine appetite for change globally, not just here, globally, where humanity is at the front of what we all want to achieve. And I watched something, not to digress, but I was watching a lot about the Holocaust a little while ago. And if you boil all those laws down, those laws came about as a result of that terrible piece of history to recognise humanity, to say that as fellow human beings, we will not do this terrible things to each other going forward. Now, I'm not sure that was achieved because terrible things have happened well past the Holocaust, but I'm still really wedded to this appetite that I can feel and see. And I think it's, you know, non-Indigenous people, be as brave as we've had to be. I'm not holding my 48-year-old colleague to account for something that happened 200 years ago. I'm pretty confident you and I were both not there. What I'm saying is I want you to embrace my humanity and I'll embrace yours, and we can move forward. And until we do that, until we see each other, really see each other and understand that commitment, we will have circular conversations. So that's my take-home message for everyone. Be brave, see me, I will see you, and then we can make a change.
Thank you. Brendan, where have you seen any examples in your career of where you've seen change or practice or partnership work particularly effectively?
Yeah, thanks, Janet. There's a few. I mean, I think the role of and what our non-Indigenous colleagues can do to help us is what my colleagues have just said. But often you'll find the non-Indigenous person has their hand on the door and they've got the ability to open it or close it to us. And I often say some of the challenges we face as Aboriginal people in Australia is the racism of some people, but the indifference of many people. And too often we see people in charge of big service systems and big organisations that are really indifferent to the plight of Aboriginal clients of those systems, or accept the statistics as just being the way it is. You know, we accept that 40% of kids in out-of-home care in New South Wales are Aboriginal, and we just accept it like it's the same as the sun rising in the morning, and it just shouldn't be. And I think non-Indigenous people have the ability to really take a strong leadership role in doing a couple of things. One is to really open the door and let us in. And that's not just in terms of employment and organisational opportunities, but it's really embracing Aboriginal people in decision-making roles and decision-making forums. But the second is to really understand your responsibility as either a regulator or as a service system provider in the difference you make in the lives of Aboriginal people and what you can do to enable that difference to be good and to be positive and to help people move along. There's not too many parts of government that don't have significant impacts on the lives of Aboriginal people. And I think too much those agencies see their role indifferently and accept the status quo as something that just is and is just going to be, rather than really bravely and boldly taking on a significant social challenge and a social problem, putting themselves in a leadership role and taking responsibility for trying to move that forward. Now, I think there's a point that Simone made earlier around not shirking your responsibility as a regulator. You know, Aboriginal organisations are there to provide services to Aboriginal people, and they exist often because of the disadvantage that our people suffer. And if you don't take your role as a regulator seriously, you're sometimes just further entrenching that disadvantage. I mean, if you don't take corrective action when it needs to be taken, hopefully that's early intervention, but if it needs to be corrective action, you don't take that early, what you're doing is subjugating those Aboriginal clients to a second-class service and entrenching the disadvantage even further by your own indifference. So don't fall into that trap. Take your responsibility properly. and open the door and let us in.
Thank you. I guess all I'd say is, as a regulator, certainly my conversations with community organisations or with our peaks, they say we want you to do your part well. Talk to us when you do it, but don't do what community should do. And I guess I wanted to open up the question which has been asked of us. Should we give the regulatory control? Should we give the regulatory responsibility to community to it more or entirely? Is that too much of a prospect for us to contemplate? Does anyone want to have a go at that one?
I think it's a really interesting concept, and I think lots of jurisdictions have been throwing that around for a little while now. And I think it goes back to it's a really interesting construct for government, because what you're saying that you're going to give up this control to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, communities, entities, and really invest in them, invest in their knowledge, invest in their service response, and see that all the way through and see if there's a difference. And I think we've gone partway on this journey in different jurisdictions over many, many years, but we haven't fully committed to it. My comment before about making sure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people had a seat at the accountability table is part of that process. It's about letting them determine what because the government's if there's money that's been inappropriately utilised and people haven't done the wrong thing, that's a criminal matter. Like, we can put that over there. But what government thinks about what is the right service response or the right accountability measure, when you go into a community and really sit down and talk to the people and get that knowledge, is a very, like, the jarring of those two things is incredible. And yet, as I said, you will get the better product and you will get the outcome you seek, but it is about government being brave and handing that over. And I think that's a really legitimate way going forward. I would love to be in Treasury across government to do the sums on not doing this previously and how much we continue to invest in the wrong service response and the wrong organisations. And it's funny, isn't it, that only Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations hit the headline when there's misappropriation or something gone terribly wrong, when we all know in our hearts we simply don't have the numbers to compete with how many non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait organisations find themselves in that sphere. It's like walking through the park and the only person you see is the different coloured person. So to me, it's be brave, government, give it a go. Let's really track those figures and outcomes, because in my heart, I think we'll have a different outcome.
Thank you. Philip, what did you want to add into that?
Yeah, thank you. And Simone's articulated it really well. For mine, just again, by exception, what I want to understand is what the workforce strategy is. So how do we get more Simones and Brendans in the world within your workforce? That would be my big message, because they're out there. It's not as if they don't exist. But what was it within their life that enabled them to achieve great things? And one of the things for mine, if I reflect on my ability and climb within the public service, has been because other people believed in me. So we are all here, 400, 700 of us on here today. We're all here because someone believed in us. So what we would ask others, who are you believing in? And that would be forming part of your workload. Workload. Too much of my work in my head. Sorry, the talent management strategy that you would have in your workplace.
Thank you, Brenda. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I fully support that. I mean, we really need to be building our Aboriginal workforces up very, very strongly, and that's true for all of the professional areas that we work in, whether it's in the legal profession, accountancy, regulatory bodies. The forward workforce strategies of those industries and those areas really needs to be about how do we Aboriginalise that workforce. And fully agree with what Philip and Simone have said, but we've talked a lot about regulating Aboriginal organisations, but I think what we've said today applies equally to the regulation of other services. When we break our arm, we don't go to a black hospital, we go to a hospital. When we get arrested, we go to a regular prison. And how those systems are regulated needs to have very heavy, strong emphasis and focus on how Aboriginal people are experiencing those systems. So this idea of engaging communities, engaging clients, engaging Aboriginal people in the workforce should permeate the entire regulatory system. It shouldn't be something that we're just applying to how we regulate Aboriginal community-based organisations. And on your point of whether government should hand over some of those functions to Aboriginal people to do, I think absolutely. And I think there's a number of different ways in which that happens. One is to Aboriginalise the bureaucracy so there are more black faces in statutory officer jobs. You're a statutory officer, Janet, I'm a statutory officer. There needs to be more of us in these kind of roles so we can start to change the organisations. But we should look at how do we hand some of that responsibility and accountability over to Aboriginal organisations to start to think about how they set standards for themselves. I mean, the people that run services are the best ones to understand what needs to apply, and we're in the best position to understand how our communities are experiencing the services they're dealing with, and to be able to take accountability, and it is a strong accountability for our own future and for the quality of our own services. And we want to do that. But we need people to open the door to allow us to be able to do that.
Thanks. So one of the questions here, and I'm mindful we're kind of getting to the end of our time, but I think you've each given some strong messages about how to approach and engage and collaborate with community and listen much more. And I've taken that away, that to be any sort of leader, but particularly in a regulatory sense, to be able to listen to the people whose outcomes and life we are trying to make better by changing the behaviour of a sector, to give, in my case, children and young people a better life. To be able to go and listen to their parents, their carers, and to children themselves is quite important, and that's a leadership style. But also, your point just then about leadership and who's heading the organisation. For the three of you as senior people in this country, if you had a room full of regulators from around Australia and New Zealand in the room today, what one thing would you want to make sure that you left with them? Acknowledging which I would, that and you have today, that we are in a particularly interesting season of change and in our community, and some of the issues that have been under the radar for a long time are now coming to the fore again. And so what challenge would you put to people like me in our role and across this country to do something different today to make a difference tomorrow? What would be your one word? So I'll start with Simone.
Hi, my one word.
Yes, your what would be your route? You can have three. That's okay.
Well, I think it is. I'm very committed to the word humanity. It's accountability, but shared, and it's openness, or even willing to be brave, because I just think that's not. We hear all the talk, we all understand methodologies, we all understand the why. What we're not willing to hear is the how, because that's slightly different.
Philip, what's your final word to us as leaders?
That Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are amazing. If you're 12 years old and you're in a classroom, mainstream media will have you believe, if you're Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young person, that you're more destined not to finish school, you're more destined to be incarcerated, you're more destined to be a victim of domestic and family violence, you're more destined to be in the child protection system. What can I tell you? In Queensland, for example, the child protection system, 96% of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people are not in the child protection system. There are people that grow up to be Simone and Brendan. We are amazing people.
Thank you each for what, I don't know about the other hundreds of people who are online today, but if it was an audience of one today, I feel like I've got such a rich conversation. So thank you all for your generosity in sharing those perspectives today. I hope that everyone who's been in the audience has really taken something away that they can do differently, that they felt the importance of that collaboration and engagement, but also courage. And that's the important thing that everyone particularly leadership needs if we're going to try something different and make a difference. So thank you all.